When you stop and think about it, our world has been completely, radically reshaped since 1900. Technology has basically compressed time and distance in ways that would have seemed like pure science fiction to our great-grandparents. Today, we're going to dig into how these incredible changes created this single, interconnected world we all live in now, with all of its amazing promises and, of course, its perils.
So the big question is, how did all this happen? How did our world get so small, so incredibly fast? The answer, really, comes down to one word: technology. That's the force that just bulldozed over geography and made our planet feel smaller than it has ever been before.
I mean, just look at the difference here. Back in 1900, your entire life was almost certainly local. If you wanted to cross an ocean, you were looking at weeks on a boat. News, it traveled at the speed of a letter in the mail. But today, we're all part of this massive global network. We cross oceans in a matter of hours, and information moves instantly. So how on earth did we get from there to here?
Okay, so first things first, overcoming geography. The huge challenge of the 20th century was just figuring out how to connect people's minds across these enormous distances. And a whole series of inventions stepped up to the plate, each one building on the one that came before.
And what's really wild is just how fast this all happened. So in the 20s, you've got radio bringing leaders like Franklin Roosevelt right into people's homes with his fireside chats. Fast forward to the 60s, and suddenly television is beaming the harsh realities of the Vietnam War directly into living rooms. Then the 80s hit, mobile phones literally cut the cord, and finally in the 90s, the internet went from this niche government project to a tool for everyone, and, well, that changed everything.
So connecting minds was one huge piece of the puzzle. But what about moving actual stuff? Physical goods and actual people. The next great leap forward was the conquest of physical space. And this is what built the backbone of the global economy we know today.
Of course, you had cars totally reshaping our cities, creating suburbs. And airplanes, especially after World War II, made the whole world feel accessible. But the real unsung hero of global trade, the one thing that truly changed how everything is made and sold, is something way, way more basic: the shipping container.
It sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? A big metal box. How could that be so important? But this humble invention was, without a doubt, one of the most important of the century. And the magic wasn't really in the box itself. It was in the idea behind it.
And the key idea was standardization. That's it. By making every single container the exact same size, you could suddenly move them seamlessly from a ship to a train to a truck without ever having to unpack anything. This one simple idea caused this massive explosion in efficiency.
And that set off this powerful chain reaction. All that new efficiency made shipping costs just plummet. All of a sudden, companies could build their factories in countries where labor was cheaper and then ship their products all over the world for next to nothing. That simple box is, pretty literally, the foundation of the incredibly complex global supply chains that run our entire economy today.
Now all this movement, all these planes and ships and factories, they all needed fuel. Which brings us to the engines of change, the energy sources that powered the 20th century, and, of course, the unintended consequences they brought with them.
For most of the century, the answer was pretty clear: petroleum. Oil was just way more efficient than coal, and it became the absolute lifeblood of the modern world, powering that explosion in transportation and manufacturing. But all that burning came with a pretty obvious cost: pollution.
And all that smog got people thinking there had to be a cleaner alternative. The great hope of the mid-20th century became nuclear power. It promised almost limitless amounts of energy, without all the soot and smog you got from fossil fuels.
So this created a really fundamental trade-off. On one hand, you have fossil fuels. They give you incredible power, but they come with greenhouse gases and pollution. On the other, you have nuclear power. It solves the greenhouse gas problem, but it introduces its own terrifying risks: the chance of a catastrophic accident and this unsolved problem of what to do with radioactive waste.
And then, those risks became reality. The partial meltdown at 3 Mile Island in the US was a huge wake-up call. But the full, devastating potential was unleashed at Chernobyl in the Soviet Union. These disasters caused unimaginable environmental damage and just shattered public trust in nuclear power for decades. It was a really stark reminder that progress often carries dangers you just don't see coming.
Okay, so we've been talking big picture: global trade, energy. Let's zoom in now from the global to the deeply personal.
to the technologies that directly changed our daily lives, our own bodies, and our ability to just survive and thrive on this planet.
I mean, the 20th century delivered what you can only really call medical miracles. Think about it. Antibiotics like penicillin turned a simple infected cut from a potential death sentence into something you could easily treat. Vaccines basically wiped out horrible diseases like polio that had terrorized humanity for centuries. And then there was the birth control pill. It didn't cure a disease, but it fundamentally reshaped societies by giving women real control over their own lives.
So these medical advances meant people were living longer, more babies were surviving, and that led to a massive population boom, which created a new, really urgent problem. How do we feed everybody? The answer was something called the Green Revolution, this huge scientific effort to dramatically increase the amount of food we could grow.
And the results were frankly staggering. Scientists developed these new, high-yield types of staple crops like wheat and rice. And these new grains could produce 3, even 4 times more food on the exact same plot of land. It literally prevented widespread famine in fast-growing countries like India and Mexico.
It was a monumental achievement, no doubt about it. But, as we've seen again and again, this progress came with a hidden price tag.
See, to get those incredible yields, farmers had to plant crops constantly, which just exhausted the soil. They also had to rely heavily on chemical fertilizers and pesticides, which would then wash off into rivers and groundwater, causing huge pollution problems. We figured out how to feed the world, but we kind of damaged the planet in the process. Another one of those complicated legacies. So, after walking through a century of just breathtaking change, where does all of this leave us? Let's try to pull all these different threads together for the final takeaway.
The end result of all this innovation in communication, in transportation, in energy, in agriculture is undeniable. We now live in a world that is smaller, faster, and more deeply interconnected than at any other point in human history.
But, and this is a really big but, that connection came with the crucial catch. The access to all these world-changing technologies and the benefits they brought has been deeply, deeply uneven. While some parts of the world leaped forward, others were left behind, and that created new and lasting kinds of global inequality.
And all of this leaves us with a question for right now, for our time, as we're standing right on the edge of new revolutions in things like AI, biotech, and new forms of energy. What's the next big shift that's going to redraw our world? And maybe more importantly, now that we've seen the lessons of the 20th century, can we get ahead of the curve this time and anticipate and maybe even prevent its unintended consequences?